I received the report of the U.S. National Investigation into the strike on Doctors Without Borders MSF Trauma Center in Kunduz City, Afghanistan on October 3rd, 2015. No nation does more to prevent civilian casualties than the United States, but we failed to meet our own high expectations on October 3rd. This was a tragic but avoidable accident caused primarily by human error. I can tell you that those individuals most closely associated with the incident have been suspended from their duties, pending consideration and disposition of administrative and disciplinary matters. The report determined that U.S. strike upon the MSF Trauma Center in Kunduz City, Afghanistan, was the direct result of human error compounded by systems and procedural failures. The U.S. forces directly involved in this incident did not know the targeted compound was the MSF Trauma Center. The medical facility was misidentified as a target by U.S. personnel who believed they were striking a different building several hundred meters away where there were reports of combatants. The report also determined that the personnel who requested the strike and those who executed it from the air did not undertake the appropriate measures to verify that the facility was a legitimate military target. On September 29th, MSF sent the coordinates of their trauma center in Kunduz to multiple recipients within the U.S. and NATO chains of command. Those coordinates were received and distributed by this headquarters to subordinate headquarters. During the evening of October 2nd, Afghan SOF advised the U.S. SOF commander that they intended to conduct a clearing operation that night. This included a former National Director of Security, or NDS, headquarters building they believed was occupied by insurgents. The Afghans requested U.S. close air support as they conducted their clearing operation. The U.S. SOF commander agreed to have the support on standby. He remained at the PCOP compound during the operation and was beyond the visual range of either the NDS headquarters or the MSF Trauma Center as he monitored the progress of his Afghan counterparts. The report found that from this point forward, multiple errors occurred that ultimately resulted in the misidentification of and the strike on the MSF Trauma Center. First, the AC-130 aircraft designated to provide close air support in Kunduz City launched 69 minutes early in response to a troops in contact situation. This type of emergency requires an immediate response. But the result was that the aircraft launched without conducting a normal mission brief or securing crucial mission essential related materials, including the no strike designations which would have identified the location of the MSF Trauma Center. Because this AC-130 aircraft and crew were ultimately not needed for the initial troops in contact mission, they were diverted in flight to provide close air support to the U.S. SOF commander in Kunduz. During the flight, the electronic systems on board the aircraft malfunctioned, preventing the operation of an essential command and control capability and eliminating the ability of the aircraft to transmit video, send and receive email, or send and receive electronic messages. This is an example of technical failure. In addition, as the aircraft arrived in the vicinity of Kunduz, the aircrew believed it was targeted by a missile, forcing the aircraft to move away from its normal orbit to an orbit approximately 8 miles from the mission area. This degraded the accuracy of certain targeting systems, which later contributed to the misidentification of the MSF Trauma Center. Through his Joint Terminal Attack Controller, or JTAC, the U.S. SOF commander provided the aircraft with the correct coordinates to the NDS headquarters building, the intended target of the Afghan SOF. The green one depicts the location of the NDS compound. Again, this was a building that the U.S. SOF commander intended to strike. But when the aircrew entered the coordinates into their fire control systems, the coordinates correlated to an open field over 300 meters from the NDS headquarters. The yellow 2 on the chart depicts the location of the open field. This mistake happened because the aircraft was several miles beyond its normal orbit and its sensors were degraded at that distance. The investigating officer found that the aircrew visually located the closest largest building near the open field, which we now know was the MSF Trauma Center. The MSF Trauma Center is depicted by the red 3 on the chart. The physical description of the NDS headquarters building provided by the Afghan SOF to the U.S. SOF commander roughly matched the description of the MSF Trauma Center as seen by the aircrew. At night, the aircrew was unable to identify any signs of the hospital's protected status. This second chart shows the MSF facility pre-strike. This is what the aircrew was able to visualize, although it would have been seeing the facility at night. According to the report, the aircrew concluded, based on the JTAC's description of a large building near field, that the MSF Trauma Center was the NDS headquarters. Tragically, this misidentification continued throughout the remainder of the operation, even though there were some contradictory indicators. For example, once the aircraft returned to its original orbit, the aircraft's grid location system correctly aligned with the NDS facility instead of the open field. However, the crew remained fixated on the physical description of the facility and at that point did not rely on the grid coordinate. According to the report, 1 minute prior to firing, the aircrew transmitted to their operational headquarters at Bagram Airfield that they were about to engage the building. They provided the coordinates for the MSF Trauma Center as their target. The headquarters was aware of the coordinates for the MS Trauma Center and had access to the no-strike list, but did not realize that the grid coordinates for the target matched a location on the no-strike list or that the aircrew was preparing to fire on the hospital. This confusion was exacerbated by the lack of video and electronic communications between the headquarters and the aircraft, caused by the earlier malfunction and a belief at the headquarters that the force on the ground required air support as a matter of immediate force protection. The strike began at 2:08 a.m. At 2:20 a.m., a SOF officer at Bagram received a call from MSF advising that their facility was under attack. It took the headquarters and the U.S. Special Operations Commander until 2:37 a.m. to realize a fatal mistake. At that time, the AC-130 had already ceased firing. The investigation found that the strike resulted in the death of 30 staff, patient, and assistants, and the injury of 37 others. U.S. Forces Afghanistan is currently working hand in hand with MSF to identify the injured and the families of those who lost loved ones in order that we may offer appropriate condolences. Based upon the information learned during the investigation, the report determined that the proximate cause of this tragedy was the direct result of avoidable human error, compounded by process and equipment failures. In addition, the report found that fatigue and a high operational tempo contributed to this tragedy. As I said in an earlier statement, this was a tragic mistake. U.S. forces would never intentionally strike a hospital or other protected facilities. Our deepest condolences go to all of the individuals and families that were affected by this tragic incident.
The investigation found that some individuals involved did not follow the rules of engagement. The individuals most closely associated with the incident have been suspended from their duty positions. I won't comment on the recommendations that have been made while those reviews are underway, and I won't comment on individual cases that are underway, as we have to allow for due process for those involved, and we must allow for the independent review by the decision makers involved. I can also say that U.S. authorities may direct additional investigations to determine whether further actions are warranted regarding actions of specific individuals that were involved. Should additional investigations be required, those will be made public once complete and redacted. Again, we have a responsibility to ensure due process for those involved. We're committed to ensuring that this doesn't happen again. We will evaluate all the recommendations in this report and use them to improve our systems and our processes. We take all reports of civilian casualties seriously, and we review each one of them thoroughly.
General, Doctors Without Borders, which has proven to be a pretty reliable source in regard to what happened there in Kunduz, said that they made at least 2 phone calls, one just prior to and one during the airstrike, to the Pentagon. And we've been told that that information was relayed from Joint Staff to the NMCC, that they were under attack. Did that information ever reach the operators there in the battlefield?
What I'd like to do is, to better answer that question, just briefly review the sequence of events leading up to the issue at hand. Approximately 12 minutes after the firing commenced, Doctors Without Borders called to report the attack. Unfortunately, by the time U.S. forces realized the mistake, the aircraft had stopped firing. It's important to remember that this was a complicated and a chaotic situation. The AC-130 had already been shot at by a surface-to-air missile. U.S. personnel at the time were focused on doing what they had been trained to do. That said, chaos does not justify this tragedy. Let me be very clear. We did not intentionally strike the hospital. We are absolutely heartbroken over what has occurred here, and we will do absolutely everything in our power to make sure that it does not happen again. You mentioned Doctors Without Borders. We have great respect for the important and life-saving work Doctors Without Borders does in Afghanistan and around the world. We're committed to working with them. We're committed to helping them, as General Campbell mentioned, rebuild the hospital and provide condolence payments for those affected by this terrible tragedy. We appreciate their dedication toward easing the suffering of those affected by conflict, and we will do everything within our power to enable their efforts.
Did the flight crew aboard the AC-130 ever express any concern or question the validity or legality of the target they were about to strike? And if there were so many problems with systems and with comms and with identifying targets, why was that attack allowed to proceed?
I'll tell you that the investigation found that some of the U.S. individuals involved did not follow the rules of engagement.